Hello and welcome to Beyond Words Presents. I'm Whitney Kwan, your host, and today I am here with Tobin Hart, the author of The Four Virtues and professor at the University of West Georgia. Tobin, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you, Whitney.
It's great to have you here. And today we're going to be talking about those four virtues. My first question, before we get into that, so everybody remembers, if you would like to pose a question to Tobin or if you have a comment, please be sure to use the hashtag BWPresents, or you can use the Q&A app in the Google Hangouts. So Tobin, my first question is rather obvious, but what are the four virtues and how or where did you come up with them?
Well, first, the four virtues aren't commandments or a code of ethics or anything of the sort. They're about internal capacities or internal qualities, and the four of them that I've named here are presence, heart, wisdom, and creation. Mm-hmm. And these are capacities, these inner virtues that have been around a long time in one way or another, but what we've tried to do here is to pull these together in a kind of matrix, a kind of integration. And they're really about the qualities that are essential, I think, for flourishing and fulfillment. It's very difficult to live in this hyper-fast, complex, demanding world, right, with everything that's going on, without some kind of inner strength or inner capacity to be a match for it. And these are about just that, those inner, sometimes we can think of them as medicine or power. Sometimes in the wisdom traditions, for example, in Native American tradition, they talk about medicine and power in the same breath. Those words are interchangeable. And so I think of these as kind of our own inner powers, and they're also medicine, healing for us and for the world as well.
Mm. So I'm curious, when you say presence, what does that mean? Like, I know presence, like being physically present, but I have a feeling that's not exactly what you're pointing to.
Well, it might be that too, in a sense, but this has gotten pretty popular in some ways. The idea of being mindful or being in the now or being present. A third of Americans, for example, have tried meditation or yoga at this point. So this has gone mainstream. Time magazine had a cover story on meditation, as most other big publications have done. New York Times regularly has articles on this. So part of the question is, well, what is this about? And what is it about, not necessarily in a religious context, but in an everyday context? And so what presence is about, from my end at least, is trying to find a way to be awake to yourself and awake to whatever is before us, whether it's the person we're speaking with, whether it's the tree in front of us, whether it's the sunset, whatever it is. It's this quality of being awake to both what's going on inside us as we react to a conversation, whatever it is, as well as what's going on the outside. And so for me, part of this is also about what I call the beautiful. That is that the quality of presence, that is being present to a person or to the moment, really opens beauty for us. That is, the person or the experience in front of us opens only to the extent that we open to it. And so that's what presence is about. It's about our being able to show up awake enough for this life that's ours. And so we break presence down into several pieces, things like focus and witness and openness and sensing as well, sensing through the body. And so these things are, you might think of as kind of operationalizing presence or mindfulness or whatever. And each of these can be developed separately. And that's part of what this book is about, is helping people identify where their strengths are, where their trailheads for growth may be, and developing through exercises and through ideas some ways that they might move forward on it. So one might have presence alone, for example, one might have a great capacity for being in their body, for sensing what's going on, for getting a sense of that gut feeling, to know what their heart's they may not be as strong at with
I'm so sorry. There's some gardening going on outside, so it might be a little hard to hear, but at the same time, that's really fantastic. And I know that there's a lot of, as you said, it's like there's a lot of people who are paying more attention to to being mindful and to being present in that moment, to be able to fully relate with others. And I know another thing that we always talk about is it's like, okay, so we have Facebook and we have Twitter and we have all of these different things that, make it easier for us to connect with each other. And do you think, like, is it possible to be your brand of presence with the people through Facebook and Twitter? Is that possible?
Well, it's an interesting question. We're all sort of functioning hybrids now, right? We're plugged in and we're connected up, and essentially we've offloaded a lot of our memory onto silicon chips, and we have instant access to information around the globe, and people have instant access to us. So one of the things that this has done is created what Linda Stone, a former Microsoft and Apple executive, called continuous partial attention. And it's this quality that we're always on the lookout for the next thing. She says talking to somebody with CPA, continuous partial attention, is like talking to somebody at a cocktail party who's always looking for the next better conversation. And suddenly they're off onto the next mark, right? So, and so part of what so part of what we have to do in this new environment of Facebook and Twitter and everything else is to make some choices, right, about how we can show up and what we need to show up to. And again, the greater the demand of that external technology, whatever it is, the greater the need for our internal technology, I think, for presence, is to balance out when we're being carried along on a roller coaster ride of somebody else's, or responding to somebody else or something else, as opposed to being awake to what it is that we need in the moment and what that situation may call for. So even the Pope, I noticed sometime in the last 18 months, suggested that for Lent, people give up their electronic media for a short while, or for part of the day. Now, that would kill many of us,
Yes.
a lifetime, right? But the idea is somehow, wow, can we notice what it's like when we don't have that, so that we can actually be more conscious when we do have it? And so that's part of the challenge, is just to find that balance.
Yeah, so it's almost exploring what life is like outside of that, so that you can bring that life outside of that to that technological thing. So creating that presence within that has to make sense to me. You're saying, the media shut off, or whatever you want to call it. I read The Artist's Way at work, and one of the things that it has you do is for a week you're supposed to not do any media, like none of it, no email, no Twitter, no Facebook, nothing. Like, so all of that just goes away. They even say it's like, don't listen to the radio, don't read books, just let all of that go. And I honestly couldn't do it. I couldn't not have that constant influx of information. And I just, I'm sure that there are many other people of my generation and of many other generations as well who are similar to that.
Yeah, and again, I think it is just an issue of, again, the greater the demand of external technology, and it will only get more demanding. The greater the need for our internal awareness to be able to say, okay, I want to run with this, or I don't want to run with this, but I can make a choice here. Because what happens with things like continuous partial attention is we lose our ability to make a conscious choice about what we want, and that's the issue here.
Yeah, and I saw in your introduction or your forward that, even the U.S. military has a term for what's going on right now, the VUCA, VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And it's interesting how like the attention, the CPA, as you call it, is going on at the same time as this like VUCA thing is going on, and it's just like everybody's attention and just their ability to center themselves is kind of, I don't know, running away or getting pulled at in many, many different directions.
Yes, the world just seems to be spinning faster. It's remarkable, and who knows why? We don't have all those answers, or even beginning to know what those answers are or where they are. But we do know what our experience is, and that's what we have to come back to. That's why, for me, this material, these inner virtues or capacities are, as I say, all about the inside. And focusing on the inside, in the end, I don't think makes us more sort of narcissistic, or I know from my experience, as far as I can tell, that inside has allowed me to really connect better to the outside. And again, it's developing this depth, and I think that's for me what this is about. It's sort of meeting the world deeply from a place deep within, and we're always having this demand quality of following up that, or being drawn to something on the outside. It's very difficult to get deep, and that's where I think we find our greatest joy and our greatest genius is when we can go deep into that place that connects to all depths, that depth of current that we live in. So deep to deep, that's the problem.
Well, and you use the word difficult, and the words that come up for me when I think about delving deeper into myself, who I am, and using the tools that you have. I mean, for me, it's actually a little bit scary. And so I think to some extent I resist it, because I just want to, it's just so much easier just to continue on the surface life and just do the things that, come up for me every once in a while. But you and I were talking right before the interview started about the fact that when my fiance Steve asks me, well, what do you want? I have a very hard time figuring out what that is. Because, it can be, what do you want, like, for dinner? Anything from that to, like, what do you want to do with your life? And in both cases, I usually have a hard time answering. And I wonder, is that potentially part of the reason? I mean, not being able to go deep, or not choosing to go deep and really discover who I am, is that maybe something that is contributing to my inability to answer those questions?
Well, we'll try not to pathologize, you or me. That's who we are. That's what we come to the table with, and so all that grace and goodness that you have about being active outside. Maybe there is an opportunity for balance on the inside, and I think that one of the things that we know, for example, and this is true in psychotherapy, and it's increasingly true now, we're finding in neuroscience and even in some spiritual traditions, is the value of coming back to the body as a source of knowing. And so, for example, we're discovering neuropeptides and the receptor sites usually associated with the brain are now found in the gut and in other places in the body. And so the question gets raised then, gee, is the gut capable of thinking? Because these peptides are associated with thought. And so one of the things that we've done since Augustine on, really, and Descartes 400 years ago, is really separate the body and the head in a lot of ways, the mind and the body. And so part of what coming back into depth means coming back into embodiment in some way, coming back into our body, coming back into being part of the body of the earth. And the more that we can sort of listen to those deep currents within us and among us, I think, one of the chapters is on sensing and sensitivity, and that's mostly about listening inward. And so we discover that that's a place where questions of meaning and clarity really begin to bubble up. And the more we practice listening to what the heart says and the gut says and the head says, all those things together. It's never one or the other. It isn't, oh, I got to listen to my heart, or I got to listen to my head. It's all of this, you know, and my guides and my values and my own, you know, sources, whatever they are. That's part of what allows us, I think, to get a little more clarity sometimes. But there may be other ways too. And it may be that there are different priorities. Some things don't matter, right? It's like, I don't care what we have for dinner, that's fine. But some things matter deeply to you or to me. And those are the things that make a difference. And so some folks, everything makes it, you know, their personality style is such that they've got to make a decision about everything. Other people are such that it's like, no, I'll make the decisions about the things that really matter and not these other things.
Yeah, I've encountered both of those for sure. Well, and just so everyone knows, we do today for our small bundle, we do have Tobin's new book, The Four Virtues, at 50% off. So it's normally $16, but today and while this presentation is up, it's only $8. So it's a 50% discount, which is fantastic because, I mean, it's a great book. And I know we've only talked about presence really specifically so far, but I'm super excited to get into heart, wisdom, and creation because I think what you've started to depict really is that full circle, that whole being, and to be able to discover where you are strong and where you might need to look to grow yourself is it's a really great place for me to be as I go into this huge transition in my life as I'm getting married. But again, so if you would like to get Tobin's book, www.beyondword.com/heart, HART. And again, if you have questions for Tobin, be sure to use the hashtag BWPresents, and you can also use the Q&A app in the Google Hangout. And so, Tobin, just to get into the one that's my favorite, because there's a great quiz at the very beginning of the book where you can determine where you have I don't know how you would term it, but it's just like where you have a lot of one and maybe not so much of the other. And I have a lot of heart, as I was sharing before the call started. So what does heart mean? Is it just love? Is it connection? Is it more than that?
Yeah, well, this is the thing that, you know, poets and philosophers have been trying to nail down forever, right? More words have been spilled on heart than anything, maybe in love. And so for me, this is in every spiritual tradition and every wisdom tradition, heart is both the path and the end goal of a life well lived, right? In Buddhism, for example, it's wisdom and compassion, and in Christianity also we see love described, and every tradition has this. So the question is, well, what is this for us? You know, what is it that this is about? And of course, heart is, for me, broke it down in this book into 4 separate elements, essentially. I'll see if I can remember. Compassion, empathy, connection, and for the life of me, I can't remember the 4th one.
I do that all the time, too.
Maybe you can help.
Feeling, compassion, empathy, feeling, and connecting.
Right. So these are, again, these different things. These are different components of that really make up the heart in a lot of ways. So, for example, empathy is the word from German means feeling into, and empathy has been described by first-run psychologists as the trait that makes us most human, and also the foundation of morality. That as soon as we're able to really imagine ourselves or put ourselves into another's shoes, we're much less likely to do harm to them. And so literally it's been described as the base of morality. And empathy is something that is a two-edged sword. So if you've got a lot of heart and you've got a lot of, and if you're maybe an empath, somebody who's got a lot of, very permeable boundaries, let's say, you may be picking up other people's vibes all the time. This notion of feeling into is real. It's not just our imagination. We even in neuroscience, for example, we now describe as fact, mirror neurons, which are these bundles of brain and body tissue in which we're literally in resonance with another person. And so this is part of the components that make up empathy. It's not all of it, but it's part of it. So literally, we do what's called neurological looping with the other person, that we literally get in a frequency lock. And we can find some evidence of this in EEG and in heart rate variability measures. So we're literally in sync with other people. Now, this is an incredible gift, right? But it also can be an incredible burden, too, particularly if we can't figure out what's ours and what's theirs. Or we can't figure out, wow, am I taking on the whole world's pain here? Am I taking on my teacher's or my partner's pain? And so, what's going on? So part of what that chapter does is begin to talk about the great value and power of empathy, but also the refinement that's necessary in order to live open-hearted in a world like this, so that we can not be overwhelmed by other people's feeling, but that we can connect to it and know them this intimately. So that's part of the challenge, is to, for example, of that capacity, is how do we do that? Someone else may have really this great sense of compassion, which is actually different from empathy. And compassion is this desire to help. And we often think, for example, for children, that we have to teach them how to be moral. And certainly our wise guidance and our hard-earned knowledge is really important. If we're going to be a parent, we need to parent, but in terms of compassion, children have natural compassion. Even the tiniest child looks like they have an ability to relate, to be empathically related, but also to reach out and comfort in some ways. And so I think in some ways part of what we do in order to help people develop their own sense of compassion, their own heart, that facet of their heart, is to give people a chance to be compassionate, to give them a chance to be of service in some way. And as soon as we do, it's not just an act of being good, it's an act of knowing the other. We know the other differently when we serve it in some way. This is service as a way of knowing.
Yeah, so that's so interesting, because there's so many people who we don't want to say, this is what's going on with me, because I don't know, we just protect ourselves. So it's not giving that person the opportunity to be compassionate and to really get related to us. That's interesting. I never thought about it that way.
And some days I wonder if folks that are really struggling sometimes have chosen to come in, in order to be service to us, so that we can learn how to be compassionate towards them. I don't know if it really works that way. Who knows? But maybe, I don't know. Because that's what draws us out. That's what draws our heart out when a child falls or drops their ice cream cone, or when we see somebody in suffering. That's when our heart sort of comes to the fore.
Yeah. Very quickly and very easily for me, at least. I know my heart is on my sleeve, as they say. Well, and the other thing that I thought was interesting when you're talking about the empathy portion of the heart is that is it something that you can create in a moment, like when you just meet somebody? Is that enough to have that empathetic connection, or is it more along the lines of people that you've known for a long time?
Well, because this capacity is both innate and I'll change that sentence. It's innate and it's immediate. That it isn't necessary. Certainly, we have people that have long-standing connections with us, and we might find this incredible looping sometimes that happens. We're about to pick up a phone to call our sister, and suddenly our sister is already on the line without having rung, and it's like, wow, how did that happen? And we're beginning to have some understanding in terms of field theory of physics and non-local influence and so forth that says, wow, this is real. This is really something that Newtonian physics can't understand or explain, but more contemporary quantum physics can. And so certainly we have that connection with people that at a distance that we've had for a long time. But this empathic connection, can be immediate. We can instantly find somebody and feel this resonance. It's as if we're both on the same frequency.
Mm.
Now, sometimes we can misinterpret that. Sometimes it means we're not supposed to sleep with them. It means something else, And
Yes.
so, that's part of the trick, and that's where one of these other virtues comes in. This notion of wisdom, this ability to really discern, and that helps balance out the heart.
Hmm. Yeah, I asked that question because I am one, I think I actually embarrass my friends sometimes, but it's like whenever I go out to dinner, I usually introduce myself to the waiter or waitress. I ask them for their name. I just want to know who they are, because I guess there's a part of me that feels like here's this person who is coming and being a part of my life for however long I'm at this restaurant. So I mean, it just makes sense to me to ask them questions and to engage with them like they are maybe not as close as one of my friends, but also just to have that connection, to establish a connection, as opposed to just here's this person who's coming and giving me food and then leaving.
Yes, it's a really lovely quality. Maybe not all your friends think that all the time, but if I were a waiter, I would appreciate that very much.
Yeah.
And I do think that describes one of the other four dimensions or facets of heart, and that is connection and connecting. And that particularly these days, we really long for connection. We really long to belong. And that need to belong is absolutely innate. It absolutely is about it happens from the moment we're born, and even before that we have this remarkable need to connect to folks and our primary caregivers or whomever. And if we don't have that, we don't develop properly. We know that now. But the trouble is, of course, once we get to be independent and in an age where we're so mobile and so forth, we don't have to connect. We can survive without much face-to-face or any kind of connection, really, and go have our groceries delivered, for example, or
Yes.
it goes online. We don't have to see anybody, right? And
Yeah.
and yet it's such a primary hunger for us to belong that's part of what I imagine you doing when you go into a restaurant like that you're in this community. You want community, and you want to acknowledge community, and you want to know that you're a self in relation. You're in relation to the people you're eating with, but you're in relation to all other things. And that's really a powerful quality, I think, and one that we're, as a culture these days, we're hungry for.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
I'm totally telling my friends that the next time we go out for dinner. I'll just be like, Tobin said this was good. Well, and so you started to mention some of the other the virtues, as well as the virtue of wisdom. And again, we were talking before this call, and the fact that I have a lot of heart, but the one that I have the lowest number in actually is wisdom. And so you mentioned the word discernment, and what is the difference between like discerning and decision making? Do you see there being a difference?
Yeah. So maybe we'll back up just a little first, and then give this a little context. And that is, these four dimensions. I think of them as like 4 points on a compass, maybe, and they form together a kind of matrix: presence, heart, wisdom, and creation. And matrix is a really fascinating word. The word means, from Latin, it means pregnant animal or womb. And together, these things are a womb out of which we sort of birth our own life. Meister Eckhart, the 14th century Dominican sage and mystic, he says in these incredible heretical lines, he says, we're meant to be mothers of God. We're meant to be mothers of God. And so for him, as a Dominican at that time, unbelievable statement, right? But it's that we're to birth divinity through our humanity. That the more we embody our full humanness is how we bring divinity to the earth. And so this is through the depth of our heart, through the quality of our presence, through the so on and so forth. And so together these things form this matrix out of which we birth this psycho-spiritual life. And so, and as you've said, sometimes when one is really strong and another is not so strong, we find ourselves out of balance. For example, for somebody who's got a lot of heart, but maybe not a lot of discernment, at least in some domains. It may be that they end up spending their heart in ways that isn't always wise, and they may burn out, essentially. And so this happens a lot, particularly with folks in the helping professions, that they may have all heart, all giving it all out there. And this, we are taught, is the thing we're supposed to do, particularly from our spiritual traditions. But again, virtually every tradition also says wisdom. You know, we don't necessarily give the $20 to the drug addict. Instead, maybe we give them a sandwich and, you know, something else, right? So it's about how you use that heart in particular ways. And when is the wise and loving thing to say no rather than yes, for example, or here instead of there. And so that's part of what discernment is about, is really being present enough. And again, these things build one on the other. So to be present enough to what's going on, to have your heart in the room enough, and to say, wow, what's required right here in this situation? Wisdom is not something that you accumulate like an entity. It's an action. So we don't have a lot of wisdom, but we may act wisely or not. And so to act wisely might be, in this moment, when my heart is open to this person, what's required here? What's the highest and the best I can do in this moment? That's an act of wisdom. And no amount of accumulated knowledge necessarily will prepare us for that moment. Certainly we can ask better questions and we may have a better track record with certain things, but wisdom is really, and discernment therefore, is about acting in the moment in a particular way, using all the things that we've got in order to make that decision.
So it's almost like wisdom isn't necessarily knowing the right answer, it's just asking the question and then taking that path, whichever it may be. Is that what you're saying?
As an activity, it's about a living moment, you know, where we're right in the middle of this situation, whatever it is, and we're trying to call forth our gut, our heart, our guide, our values, our virtues, all these things in order to say, aha, what's required in this moment? What's the wisest thing I can do? And, you know, Aquinas, for example, the founder of the Jesuits, he said that wisdom is a blend, or rather wisdom involves seeing from a greater height or seeing into the heart of something. And so it isn't just making all the calculations, it's about, what's here. Abraham Heschel, great Jewish theologian, he says, the beginning of wisdom is wonder, and the beginning of wonder is awe. And so he says, the greatest moments, the greatest wisdom happens to us, not in moments of calculation, but instead in moments of awe, in moments of being alive to the mystery of the moment. And so this is a very different calculus than the kind of decision-making, problem-solving that is really important and part of what we do, but it also brings in discernment, brings in some other qualities as well.
Well, and it's a different kind of wisdom. I guess for me, I've always kind of perceived wisdom as being somebody who is well-educated, who has a lot of background, and I go to somebody who I perceive as wise if I need advice about something, and this is a very different take on it, and to me that it's very empowering too, because it's like, okay, yeah, I am wise in my own ways.
Yeah. And again, not to discount that hard-earned practical wisdom that people have. How do I get things done? Because that's one of the ways that people do talk about wisdom, but there's something more to it than that as well.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Well, and then you mentioned all sorts of different thought leaders and people who have discovered new and different things around this. And I'm just curious, how did you figure out these virtues? Where did you find them? How did you find them?
Well, I think it's fair to say that years ago, one of the other things that I've worked on in my life has been children's spirituality and children's spiritual experience, and that got kicked into gear when one of my daughters was about 6.5 and started to tell us about some of her experiences. And I said, well, this isn't in any of my psychology books, or really it isn't even in any of the spiritual books about children's spiritual life. And
Yeah.
so my wife and I, Mary, did years of research, and she started a project looking at what are those things that we might do to help develop the psychospiritual life of children. And so years later, I took this up in a little different way and talked about it in terms of adults and young adults, and that's what this book is about. So for me, these qualities, these virtues, heart, wisdom, presence, and creation, are ones that certainly have been around for a long time. And when I started trying to sift and sort this and say, gee, how do we help people find their way? What are the things that they need on the inside in order to help them find this flourishing and fulfillment? And both of these, or rather these things, were both psychological and spiritual, I realized. And that's sometimes where some traditions or some practices sort of fall off the rails, is that they may develop one and not the other. And that for me, I come to understand that both of these are required. But they're strange and paradoxical qualities. For example, the psychological asks us to be self-separate, and the spiritual asks us to be one. The psychological develops our will, and the spiritual asks us to be willing. So these are very strange things, and yet both of these are required. And in fact, every step that we go further in terms of what we might call spiritual growth, we have to do a corresponding development of psychological. So those things are part of what sort of brings this together. And of course, we see the errors in both directions. These great spiritual gurus, for example, who end up having sex with their flock. They're being betrayed by a guru in one way or another. It becomes a cliche almost. And on the other hand, folks that may have great spiritual or great psychological maturity, great sense of will, but may not have that sort of profound sense of ability to surrender, or to be willing, or to be able to connect at a deeper level, and therefore at midlife or at some other point they feel like something is lacking. So these things go hand in hand. These things are required together. And so part of what I discovered as I came into this, and really lived with this for quite a long time, this work, this book, is that the qualities that are described as often the most enduring capacities for a life well lived, the good, the true, and the beautiful, that the Greeks 2,500 years ago articulated, and are still around and are still described, the good and the true and the beautiful, they happen to line up for me, to presence, heart, and wisdom. And when I saw that, I thought, oh my goodness, so that gave a kind of validation for me that these things seem really enduring and universal. And to those we added one more, and that is this notion of creation, that essentially that we need this other thing. This is about finding our own voice, that is our unique creative expression in the world. And we may have all the heart in the world and all the wisdom and all the presence, but unless we find a way to be able to bring those powers, those medicines, into the world in some way, in our unique creative expression, it backs up and clots our consciousness. And so that was the fourth dimension of this compass.
Can you talk about creation a little bit? Because creation, we very, very quickly go to creativity, drawing, painting, like that direction. It's so easy for us as people to just go directly to the arts when you talk about creation. So, but it sounds like creation is very different for you. It's finding your voice, and how do you do that? How do you know what your voice is?
That's a great question, and like a tree, it's something that continues to grow probably, and there's a new branch and a new leaf, and wow, how did that bend around that way? What's that bird doing on me? And so, why is the wind blowing me this way? So creation is really again about, in part about finding our voice, and by voice, I mean specifically our unique creative expression in the world, and so. Certainly that could be in the form of a great artist, but what we know is that creativity takes all kinds of forms, and it's not just always about what we're doing, but it's particularly about our way of being in the world. So the way that one thinks about themselves, or the way that one thinks about um, what's happening in this relationship at this moment may be an act of real creativity in which they may find a new path to go, a new way to look, a new idea to bring in. And so this certainly can be about finding our calling, finding our path, but it's about some other things too. So one of the things that Alfred North Whitehead, the great philosopher from Harvard years ago, said that he said that the teleology of the universe is in the production of beauty. He said that, meaning the direction, the outcome, the whole direction of the universe is in production of beauty. But it means that we've got to create that in some way. So how do we recognize and create beauty in our own life, in our own heart, in our own relationship, in our own surroundings, in our own work that we do? Is there a way to create that in the here and now? He says that one of the things, one of the qualities of this creation is adventure. And he says that we, by definition, as humans, are required to go on an adventure, that our life is an adventure. And that a lot of times in going through our day-to-day grind, it feels less like an adventure and more like we need one, right? And so the issue of creation, creativity is about, wow, how do we return that sense of adventure? How do we find adventure in our life? And that requires things like imagination, originality, and some other things as well to really bring us awake and alive to this moment.
That's really interesting because I've always been almost obsessed with adventure. Like I want to travel all over the place. I want every day to have something new for me. I always want more adventure in my life because it's like discovering something new, and whether it's something that you already know of and you're just discovering it newly for one reason or the other, or it's just something completely new to you. It's, to me, that's like a little mini adventure.
Exactly. That's a great description of it. And again, how this stuff is not about necessarily going to the moon or somewhere else, but it's about the adventure in this moment. One of the chapters, one of the facets of creation is will and willingness, this balance of will and willingness. And so, for example, it's to live on the planet, it's required that we really develop the strength of our will, making good choices, asserting ourselves, sustaining our path, and persevering, and having the courage to persevere in a direction, really exerting our will. But folks that only do that end up feeling kind of flat and bossy, And the other side of this is willingness, and that willingness is what's described in the wisdom traditions usually as surrender, of allowing in one way or another. And it's this very fine-tuned sense of, wow, let's see what comes to me today. Maybe in my heart or my mind or with that bird that lands on my branch or that thing that comes to me, and then how will I blend that with my will? How will I take action in a way that engages with this, just as you've said, in a sense of adventure or novelty or originality or love or whatever it is, right? And so it's that balance, but it is finding that fine-tuning. Some of us are willing to surrender at any moment to anything, right? But that's where we want to ultimately. That's the spiritual quest. I just want to, let me turn it over. And yet we're not built for that. We're built for this balance of will and willingness, the psychological and the spiritual. And that's part of where things like wisdom come in to say, wow, let me use my discernment to decide what it is that is okay to surrender to and what it is that may not be so.
Well, and I love what you're saying too, because there are so many people who stereotype themselves as, oh, I don't have a lot of heart, or this is just the way I am. And what you're saying really just, it speaks to us as a whole, as human beings, and that it kind of takes away all of those, this is just the way I am, and really speaks to this is how we're built, as you said. It's our construction. So it's not a oh, this person is so much different than this person. It's just that we have different strengths and different places to work on.
Yeah, and one of the other facets in this chapter on creation, or this part 4 on creation, is about originality. It's about finding our original voice. I just realized that I've got a plug that's unplugged in my batteries. There we go. Okay. My battery is going out there. Sorry about that. A little charge there.
Okay.
So originality is about finding that thing that really is unique to you and really trusting that original voice. So I think it's, there's this balance always of, well, what is really me? What is the thing that really makes me me on the one hand, but on the other hand, how am I going to use that in a way that is in alignment with what I choose? So it is this always, again, I think, this question of balance, and that is both really making choices, but also finding that deep current to which we really belong. Finding that secret that unlocks that key into our deepest sense of who we are. And I do think we're not just about what we choose to be. We are about, we've come in with something, right? We've come in with particular talents and our unique directions. And so what are we going to do with them is really the question.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, so just before, we're coming up on only about 10 minutes left, but I just wanted to mention one more time, we have Tobin's book, The Four Virtues, which is really, I'm so fascinated by everything you're saying, and just the word balance keeps coming up over and over and over again, and I know it's a word that we hear all the time, but I'm so excited. Like, this book, I will offer you that balance, and will offer you that exploration of yourself. So, and be sure to go to www.beyondword.com/heart, HART, and you can get it for a 50% off discount. So it's $8 instead of the normal $16. So one of the things that I'm also curious about, because you have worked so deeply with children, is this something that you have brought to children and you've seen has made a difference for them?
Whitney, could you ask me that again? I lost you just a little bit. Sorry.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You have had a lot of experience with children, and you've worked with children on their spirituality, and I'm just curious, have you brought the four virtues to children? Have you seen them manifest in a different way with children?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as I said before, my wife really gets a lot of the credit for taking the lead with that over the years, and I think these exactly these same qualities are as relevant in young people as they are with, we old people. And absolutely, it just happened that in this iteration, the voice that seemed to be important for me to write to was adults, and to some extent young adults as well.
Mm.
But absolutely, these same capacities, these same qualities are there for kids. And it is a question of both the psychological and the spiritual, really finding the balance of those things and growing those inner capacities.
Mm. How do you do that with your children? I'm not personally a parent, but this is one of those things. It's like you can't actually just hand a kid a book and say, "Here, read this." But how do you are there some practices that you have to develop that with your kids, and maybe things that you could do yourself with your kids?
Yeah, it's probably easier to talk about nuclear fusion than it is to talk about good parenting, right? But
Yes.
we know some things, right? And one of the first things that I think that is important is actually it's about doing our own work.
Yeah.
So the greatest thing we can do for our kids is to do our own work. The second thing I think is that when we look at our child, there are two things, or any child, if we're a teacher, if we're a therapist, or whatever it is that we're working with, whether it's a child or some other loved one. The issue is, can you both hold them and behold them? And holding them for a parent means, setting limits when you need to set limits. Stepping up for parenthood. Not indulging in everything. Giving your hard-earned advice, even if it's not welcome. Sometimes you need to do that, and doing all those other things that we do to hold and keep them safe, right? But the other thing is about beholding, and this is a quality about presencing a lot, I think, in which we may enter into seeing them not just as our children. Khalil Gibran, the great Lebanese poet, he said, "Children come not from us but through us."
Mm.
And so to recognize as we behold this being in front of us, whether it's you and me noticing each other, or whether we're looking at nature, or whether we're looking at a child, to what extent can we really take in the other person exactly and only as they are, without our expectations, without our judgments, without anything? Can we appreciate them for who they are? And I think that is an act of profound respect. And in combination with this holding, this beholding allows us to really allow them to come through us, essentially, and to be who they are. So anyway, that's maybe the best I can do on 2 minutes on parenting.
That's wonderful, and it's great advice for not just parenthood, but for relating to people in general. To behold people and to really see them for who they are and relate to them just exactly for who they are and not what your expectation of them would be. And I know with kids, there's probably a lot more expectations on how they should behave and what they should or shouldn't be doing. But I, as one who doesn't have kids, I have those expectations, guilty, for everyone around me.
Well, and I would say that it's good to have expectations of our kids. We should have expectations of them. We know what works and what doesn't, or at least
Seems as though Tobin has frozen a little bit. So until he comes back, I'll just mention one more time. We do have his book available for 50% off, $16 usually, but for right now it is $8 only, which is such a great deal. So go to www.beyondword.com/heart, HART, to get to grab this book and to get a better idea. I mean, what he's talking about is just a little piece of the pie, and I've only had a chance to skim through it, but you can tell through what he's saying and what he's sharing that there's so much more there. Oh, it looks like Tobin's back.
Hi, Whitney. We just
There.
lost you. Yeah.
Yeah, that was interesting. I was just sharing with everybody one more time about your book being available for that great half-price discount, and you were talking about having expectations of children and making sure that children do have almost like parameters within which to grow.
Yeah, and I think that kids need something to push against too. You know, and it's usually, at least as adolescence approaches, it's the parents, and that's okay because again, it helps them identify, wow, I believe this or I don't believe this, but let me test it out. So, we don't want those heavy-handed sort of expectations that really truncate a kid's choices, but we sure can have good expectations for what we value and
Mm.
what we think is virtuous, right? So,
Yeah. Well, and do you have any specific practices that listeners or viewers can take away with them? Just like one practice where they can either like be more present or center themselves or something like that we can take away and that I can take away and do in my life.
yeah, just to again give it context a little bit, throughout this book, each chapter, in addition to the introduction, each chapter begins with a little quiz. It's a little self-scoring quiz that helps identify, for example, where our great strengths are and where trailheads for growth might be. So there are actually 17 of these little quizzes spread throughout the book. So, um, and then at the end of the chapters, there are exercises, and some of these are drawn from experts across the wisdom traditions and across the world, and some of them are ones we've created just for this. And they just scratch the surface. There are plenty of other good ones out there. But what these do is bookend each of these chapters to give people something very sort of down to earth to reflect upon, and then something to be able to experiment with. So,
Mm.
I think the first thing that comes to mind is, as far as a practice, is just what we were talking about before, and that practice of beholding, to be able to lead with appreciation rather
Mm.
than to lead with judgment. And so, whether it's at dinner this evening or whether it's with a person we're speaking with, is there a way that we can lead with a kind of appreciative inquiry about them,
Mm.
curiosity about them? So appreciation, curiosity, openness, those would be the qualities, as opposed to I want you to do this, or judgment, or or agenda. So no agenda except
Mm.
for appreciation, curiosity, and again,
Mm.
it's not that we lose our need to make good judgments, but it is a way for us to encounter the other. And this is something that really, I think, is sorely lacking these days, even in schooling, which is one of the areas that I'm really interested in. I notice that we think critically, but we often don't think appreciatively. And again, if Abraham Heschel's words mean anything, the beginning of wisdom is wonder, and the beginning of wonder is awe, then the idea of moving into appreciation, awe, that connection, is a way in which the other opens to us. We get to see more rather than just enter in with this sort of critical mindedness.
Mm. It's really interesting because as I can just look at how I relate to people, and usually like that first thing that comes to me is judgment. It's definitely not, wonder and awe and trying to relate to this person and getting connected with them. It's always just like, oh, here's my judgments and opinions about this person, and I'm going to relate to them through that. And then, once I get through all that, which, sometimes happens, sometimes doesn't, then we'll get to the wonder and the awe and the connecting and that definitely has me probably be more frustrated than is necessary.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it's nice to recognize that, and that's
Mm.
part of the quality of witnessing, for example, to be able to say, "Wow, okay, I'm just judging, the heck out of them right now.
Yeah.
Let me just take note of that, and when I get a moment of pause, maybe I'll try to shift into that appreciation.
Yeah.
That judgment is hard earned. It might be worthwhile. There may be some things to learn in.
Yeah, but I love the idea of coming, because that judgment will always be there, but to come from that appreciation first would have me have completely different conversations with people. It would be, yeah, that judgment's still present, but that judgment's more a piece of who I am in this conversation as opposed to the whole of who I am in the conversation. Cool.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, we are almost at our time. So, Tobin, I just want to say thank you so much for being on the show. I've learned so much.
My pleasure, Whitney. It's been great to be with you, and congratulations on the upcoming wedding.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited, and I'm going out to dinner with my fiance tonight, and I'm really excited to come at it with, from appreciation and see how that shifts things. I'm really excited about that. But so everyone knows, next week we will have Katherine Gibson on the show. She's the author of Unclutter Your Life. She's going to be coming in and she's going to be talking with us how we can unclutter our house, unclutter our car, and most importantly, unclutter ourselves. So looking at all of the different aspects, the stuff, and then also the thoughts that we have that we can get rid of so that we can really live our best life. And then another thing I want to share with you guys is that Beyond Words is doing a whole new thing. We are live streaming the Afterlife Awareness Conference. So instead of purchasing a ticket to be there live, if that's not possible for you, it's $360 normally to go to the show itself, but we are offering a live stream of the main stage presentations for $97 alone. So it's an amazing deal. And to get it, you can go to www.beyondword.com/afterlife. So be sure to go grab those. The Afterlife Awareness Conference is June 6th through 8th. Again, Tobin, thank you so much for being on the show with us, and I really look forward to seeing what this new perspective is going to bring for me and my soon-to-be husband.
My pleasure, Whitney. Thank you so much.
Thank you.